Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, an evening out at the pub turns deadly when a patron flies into a sudden fit of rage.
People were shot in a place where they expected to be safe.
You see it on the news, but it's very, very difficult to think that it's ever going to happen to you.
There's broken glass, there's ricochet bullets, and there were shell casings on the road.
The stakes are high. A dangerous person's out on the street.
We didn't think we were going to get him without a fight.
If I come back in this room, I'm going to have to defend myself.
You don't want it to get to court and fall apart. You want an airtight case.
Here now is Catherine McDonald with Shootout at the Duke.
It should have been a night to kick back and relax.
The bar was full. It was a Friday night, loud music was playing, everybody's having a good time.
On this occasion, a casual night out turned into a chaotic nightmare.
There's bullets flying, pandemonium, people are screaming, people are running out of the place, and next thing you know, it's over, and everybody, all of a sudden, it's like it's slow motion. What just happened?
It was the 25th of October in 2008, and approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from the duty desk.
He basically tells me, there was a big shooting, Duke of York, and I'm Duke of York, I know that place. And I had gone there socially with friends during, afternoon karaoke events. And and I knew the owners quite well.
A place where you could go get a burger, a place where maybe there were deals on drinks. It was a regular bar that had, in fact, I think, been on that corner for decades.
There was a large mural of John Wayne holding a rifle on the side of the building. There were metal rings that were attached to the wall where people could come in the day and tie up their horse. That's how long this establishment had been around.
He had told me that the place was packed. I said to him, oh, of course it'd be packed. It's Friday night. There should have been over 100 people in that premise.
Police say an argument started around 1 a.m., then escalated outside the Duke of York tavern. That's when the suspect pulled out a semi-automatic handgun.
5 people were shot, one of them fatally.
It's raining. The scene is chaotic. There's broken glass all over the sidewalk. There's multiple bullet strikes on the wall, the north wall of the Duke of York. The forensic identification team is on scene. They're placing evidence markers down on the sidewalk. They're taking video and still photography of the crime scene.
First of all, the entire road's closed off. A streetcar was passing. It was stopped mid-road. Police officers everywhere, yellow tape everywhere. There's a lot of juggling, I think, in the opening hours of an investigation, because you're really trying to figure out what's the priority. There was some confusion as to, because obviously the shooting had happened outside, but the question was had the perpetrator been inside the premise at some point? And then we determined that yes, he had. So then the inside of the bar comes into play, because there's glasses that are there, there's coats that have been left behind. There could be DNA inside that would help place the suspect within the premise.
It was sort of surreal. You can visualize that people have been running for their lives at some point. There's broken glass, there's ricochet bullets into the door frame, there's bullets on the ground, there were shell casings on the road from where the offender started shooting at. We had an officer that was an expert in trajectory, and he was able to tell us that bullets went through the front of the door, went through into their victim, and then some of the bullets actually possibly had gone through the victim into the bar, and that's how other people inside got shot.
Do you know if the woman who got shot to death was the intended target? Is that something you're thinking about at that point?
We don't know. There's a whole bunch of unknowns at that point. That could have been at that time a possibility, but for all intents and purposes, we didn't have a clue.
Initially, there were 4 other victims. They were in different locations. Some were outside, some were inside. So we determined from the scene investigation that a number of the bullets that were fired actually traveled into the bar and struck people who never came outside to watch this fight that was about to take place. So at least two of the victims were actually inside and were struck by bullets that came from outside to inside. Other victims were standing outside at the time of the shooting taking place. They were all non-life-threatening. They were all transported to hospital and their injuries were treated. They were not hospitalized for any significant period of time. Most significant of the injuries was a woman who found out on the night in question that she was pregnant. She had been shot in the abdomen and as a result of her treatment found out that she was pregnant. The bullet was left inside her, and she had a scheduled C-section where the child on the delivery date was delivered by a surgeon, and at the same time the bullet was removed and it was collected by a forensic officer who was just outside the surgery room, and that bullet was collected like another physical piece of evidence at the time of the child's birth.
Initially, we tried to direct the officers at the scene to start getting names and do a triage, basically. Get names and find out where were people situated in the bar at the time of the event.
Many people who are exposed to like a shooting event flee the scene, and they are never identified to the police. So as a result of it, we're dealing with, I'd say, 20 witnesses, potential eyewitnesses, who might be at the division prepared to speak to the police, but there would have been dozens more who fled before the police even arrived. I instructed the detectives to start those interviews. Don't wait for me, get started. I'll participate in the interviews when I get there, but get them started. Because in my experience, when witnesses are required to sit around for long periods of time, they get antsy and a lot of times they leave.
It took us a better part of a month to track down a lot of the people because we couldn't keep them hostage, so we could do our investigation. And, by the time we got to some of these people, it didn't take us long to figure out how traumatized people were.
Police spend all of Saturday and well into Sunday speaking with witnesses and manage to piece together part of the story.
We now know that our deceased is just a patron of the bar, and she just moved to this neighborhood months prior, and she's just out on a Saturday night to have a drink, and she was outside having a cigarette and talking to people that she just recently met. And we don't quite know exactly, if they're involved or what their role is or if they're connected to anybody, but they were all patrons of the bar, just out for a Saturday night. They weren't looking for trouble.
After the break, the full story emerges and a manhunt begins. Welcome back to Crime Beat. The investigation heats up after police learn a motive for the rampage and who the gunman is. We now return to Catherine McDonald and Shootout at the Duke.
Police talk to dozens of traumatized eyewitnesses.
They described it as pandemonium. They described it as we were there celebrating a birthday, and then next thing you know, I'm at the bar getting a beer, and my beer got shot out.
My wife gets shot. That's pretty bad.
I seen the glass breaking, and I tried to jump out of the way, but I was already shot.
As people do their best to recount the experience, a picture emerges, and so does a name.
There had been a dispute within the Duke of York between two men in relation to accusations that one of the patrons of the bar had been flirting with Kyle Weese's girlfriend. And as a result of that, Weese intervened, words were exchanged, it became increasingly more heated.
Kyle gets ejected from the bar, he's angry, he's pissed, he's very angry. And out of nowhere, someone appears and hands him a gun. We were never able to identify that person. To this day, we don't know who that was. And next thing you know, he's firing to the extent that he's firing so much, he empties the 15 rounds, and he is so focused on shooting out that bar, he doesn't even realize he's run out of bullets. You know, the witnesses described that they can still hear the clicking of the gun as he's run out of bullets.
6 of those bullets passed through a young woman named Bailey Zavita.
She had no connection. She stepped out for minutes to have a cigarette, and her life was terminated in this horrible, senseless violence.
Bailey was only 23 when she passed away, and we had our whole lives ahead of us.
Bailey grew up in the small town of Brockville, 3 doors down from Jessica Farella.
It was losing a best friend, a sister. I still struggle to put into words exactly how it felt. I was supposed to be with her that weekend, and I was really sick, so I couldn't go. I would say that for a really long time I held a lot of guilt and what ifs. If I had gone, would she have been there? If I had gone, would we have gone there? She loved to sing and dance. She loved country music, old country. She was social, literally a social butterfly.
School, she excelled in. She loved to read. Coloring, not very good at the drawing part. Horses, outside life.
Bailey's mother, Helen, says one of the highlights of her daughter's life was meeting the Olympic champion horse, Big Ben.
The year after Big Ben and Ian Miller retired Big Ben, that horse was bought originally with a lady on just down the highway here, St. Albans Stable. They had this fundraiser that she could go, a bunch of them, and sleep overnight in the stable with Big Ben. Oh, to be able to see him up close like that was incredible. She loved it.
What was she like as a teen? Did she give you a lot of sleepless nights, or was she a good girl?
No. Sleepless nights, for sure, because she didn't like curfews, because if there was a lot going on where she was, and she wouldn't want to leave that environment.
Bailey had the loudest, most contagious laugh that ever existed. She was always happy and always smiling and laughing, and that's probably what drew us together, and that's what kept us together. And our friendship, I have yet to this day ever had a friendship like I had with her.
Bailey was also a young woman who was going places.
She got what I would call her dream job at the time, which was working for a marketing company. And she was like, just so excited. I remember her calling and saying, like, I've got the big girl job, like I've got my own office and I have a business card. And she just loved it. It was the best thing that could have ever happened to her. She was at like one of the best parts of her life.
Until that life was cut short.
Saturday morning, just shy of 10:30, I was sitting at the table working on a project and having a coffee, and I blinds her up and I see this police car, city cop, go by, slow, stop, slow, down, back again, turned around, back again, parked out in front, and 2 of them come to the door. And that's the day everything changed. There's been an incident in Toronto, and we think your daughter might have been involved. I said, this can't be. Phoned her home number, phoned her cell number. Of course, no answer. I'm flipping at this time. You need a good 3.5 hours to get from here to downtown Toronto. So we went. We got there just shy of 4 o'clock, and I didn't get called upstairs into Gary's office till 5 to 6 that night. It was like somebody took my heart right out of me. I wouldn't wish that experience on my worst enemy, ever.
The name Kyle Weese started to emerge quickly, and so as a result of it, we started to, dig into his past, and we found out that he was a violent person. He had a violent history. So we knew we were dealing with a major, major community safety issue in relation to this individual.
Especially since the gun had not been recovered.
Within a couple of days, we had sworn out a Canada-wide warrant for the arrest of Kyle Weese on a charge of second-degree murder and a number of counts of attempted murder.
The police manhunt has begun for Weese in case he flees the city.
The borders are flagged, the airports are flagged, there's no place to go.
We couldn't find him. We didn't know where he was, didn't know where he was living. We had multiple addresses for him.
This is Allen Gardens. It is a park about 4 kilometers or so from the shooting scene at the Duke of York. In 2006, Kyle Weese was convicted of discharging a firearm in this park and wounding someone. 7 other charges against him at that time were dropped.
And as you can appreciate, based on the fact that it was an extremely high-profile shooting, it was a shooting in a public place. The Toronto Police Service were saying to me, what do you need by the way of policing resources to apprehend this individual? So I was using the Gun and Gang Task Force. I was using the TAVIS officers who were in uniform on general patrol. Certain locations, I would use the emergency task force to breach a door. We're attending addresses that he's known to frequent, family and friends, girlfriends, relationships, people that are long-standing friends of Kyle Weese within the community, and there were many of them. And we're making it clear to them that in the event that they should make a conscious decision to hide this particular individual, they'll be on the receiving end of criminal charges themselves.
One person who may know where Weese is his brother, 23-year-old Matthew Weese, reportedly one of the people injured in the same melee outside the club Sunday.
As a result of the hospital protocol that exists, that if patients come in and self-present themselves with a gunshot wound, they're required to call the police. And we found out that Matt Weese, Kyle Weese's younger brother, presented at hospital with a through-and-through gunshot wound to his arm.
He tried to medicate himself and treat himself, but that didn't work out very well for him. His injuries worsened and his injury got infected and he ended up being hospitalized.
His brother had arrived kind of at the material time when the argument was unfolding. And as everyone was exiting the bar to watch the fight, Matt Weese was exiting the bar to find out what was going on with his brother, just as the shooting was taking place. And as a result of that, when Kyle Weese fired into the crowd, he actually shot his brother, and his brother left the scene in a taxi.
So we ended up going to see him, trying to interview him. Although he was cooperative to some extent, he didn't know who shot him, and he didn't concede that his brother was involved in the shooting.
Coming up after the break, the gun turns up in an unrelated crime. As the hunt for Kyle Weese continues, the gun is found in someone else's possession. We now return to Catherine McDonald and Shootout at the Duke.
It's been 36 hours since the shooting at the Duke. Multiple victims and dozens of witnesses are being interviewed. And an all-hands-on-deck manhunt is in full swing when Kyle Weese makes a surprising move.
My partner, Detective Verna, and I were doing interviews in other parts of the city, and during one of those interviews, in a closed-door type of setting, a note was slipped under the door, and the note indicated that the offender, Kyle Weese, had surrendered with a lawyer at 55 Division.
I don't think we actually thought he was going to turn himself in and surrender himself. We didn't think we were going to get him without a fight.
Carl, just for the record, my badge is here, and my name's Detective Sergeant Gary Giroux, and I'm with the police, okay?
Just for the record, this is from my lawyer's office. I believe you read it, so I don't know what I'm doing up here.
Our initial interactions were, he was so aggressive that in all of my 22 years in homicide, I had officers standing outside the interview room door because I was that concerned about how violent he was.
I'll ask you if you want to give us a statement tonight with regards to the allegations. It's your decision, ultimately.
Obviously, my decision's been made.
And what's that?
You can read, right?
Yeah.
Now the ball starts ticking, right, rolling. Is he going to talk to us? Are we going to be able to take a statement from him? What will he say to us?
I told him, why you guys even bringing me here? You guys are breaking the agreement with my lawyer.
Well,
but if you guys like to break the law, that's your business. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep doing what you're doing, and I'll just tell my lawyer you guys are harassing me.
Okay. But what you need to understand is that
I don't really need to understand anything except for my rights to my lawyer, and that's all I need to understand. So my lawyer told me I don't have to say nothing. So
you're
I'm not saying
absolutely
nothing.
right, Kyle. You don't have to say a single thing, but it doesn't negate the fact that we can ask you certain things,
You
and
can
whether
ask
you
me whatever you want.
whether you choose to answer is your right.
Exactly. So
Okay.
you could ask me anything you want until you're blue in the face. No, I'm just going to tell you I'll wait for my lawyer.
Obviously, you know, you've been hiding out for a few days. You've shaved your head. You've altered your appearance, and as a result of that, what we call that in what we do is we call that consciousness of guilt.
Call that scared. Call that whatever you want, but it doesn't matter what you say, because all that matters is that I want to see my lawyer.
Okay, well, like I say, you don't have
Matter
to
of
answer.
fact, I want to call my lawyer right now.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to do that, and then what we'll do is we'll come back in and we'll see if.
If I come back in this room, I'm going to feel like I'm being threatened, and I'm going to have to defend myself.
Really? Well, that's not going to be good for you.
We don't get an interview from him. He doesn't agree to provide us a statement. So he gets processed, he goes to court. And now we're still doing our investigation. It doesn't stop. You're getting it ready for court because you want this. You don't want it to get to court and fall apart. You want an airtight case.
At the same time as Kyle is being processed, so too are the ballistics from the crime scene.
There were 13 cartridge cases and 5 bullets and several fragments as well, jacket fragments, I believe. When you pull the trigger of a firearm, you release the firing pin, and that strikes the primer, which ignites the powder that's in the cartridge. And this powder burns really quickly, and it creates a lot of gas. And it's this gas that's created in this very tight space that forces the bullet out of the cartridge and down the barrel.
There's rifling inside that barrel that leaves unique marks and dents on the bullet, helping forensic scientists match ballistics to the weapons that fired them.
The cartridge cases and the bullets shared the same caliber. They shared the same firing pin impression, shape, same number of lands and grooves and direction of twist. So they were identified to the same, having been fired by the same firearm, and the bullets as well were identified as having been fired by the same firearm.
Police still did not know where that gun was, or how Kyle Weese had gotten his hands on it, but they discovered it had been used before by someone else.
So IBIS is an investigative database, and it takes images of ammunition components from the cases that we do, and it looks at cases that have already been submitted, and then it generates a list of potential linkages.
The database contains ballistic evidence from cases all over North America.
The system actually returns to us hundreds of possible linkages. We found that reviewing the top 30, top 35 images, you'll probably see a hit within there if there is one. It'll be very close, side by side. The lines, the orientations of the striations, the scratches will all be reproducible. So from your exhibit A to B, they will follow the same direction. Same with the depths and the thickness of those striations and impressions, they should be the same for a match.
What is the result of this investigation?
In this case, it was determined to be linked to a previous shooting occurrence from 2005.
3 years earlier.
Correct.
In that incident, a man driving a borrowed car was ambushed in a Toronto laneway. The shooter fired at the car, hitting the man several times in the chest. The victim survived, but the gun was never found. After the Duke shooting, it disappears again. Then turns up 6 weeks after Kyle Weese surrenders.
It's recovered in a case of a carjacking and robbery during the search warrant of one of the suspects.
They uncovered 2 firearms, and when they do the testing on the firearms, the one particular firearm linked back to our shooting at the Duke of York.
The gun used at the Duke of York tavern was used in other crimes.
Right.
Is that unusual?
I would say no. We, we had a recent case in my unit where one firearm linked to 7 incidents.
How common is that you would see a gun being used over and over again?
The number one crime gun used in Ontario and Toronto is a Glock. A brand new Glock that's from Florida that is clean is $55,000, $6,000. So I might be in a position where I don't have $6,000 to purchase. I just might be part of a group where I could rent that gun, or I could just use it for a month and return it.
It gives new meaning to gun for hire, and it's a growing problem.
The prevalence of firearms has increased. The access to firearms has increased. When I say access, I mean immediate access. No longer is the firearm kept at your home, your condo, in your car. It is these individuals are carrying them on their person.
In front of you today are 62 firearms, including 5 AR-15 semi-automatic rifles.
Of the 62 firearms seized, 57 were traced to the United States, primarily Arizona and Texas, and only one of these firearms was traced to Ontario. The flow of guns from the U.S. into not only Ontario but Toronto is significant. The vast majority of crime guns are from the United States, to the tune of probably 87%.
Police have arrested 2 men in a double shooting near the beach.
A 15-year-old boy was murdered, and several people were shot over the weekend.
Police are on the scene at a triple shooting on Queen Street West near Augusta Avenue.
Increasingly, those shootings are becoming more random and deadly.
We're dealing with firearms that have been converted. They call it an auto selector switch and extended magazine. The amount of firearms with auto selector switch, which converts them to fully automatic, basically a machine pistol instead of a semi-automatic, that has quadrupled in the last 3 years. So that speaks to the amount of rounds being discharged. The more rounds that are discharged, the more likely innocent people and or not just the involved or the target is going to be struck.
Which brings us back to the shootout at the Duke.
The accused in this case was removed from the bar, and at that point in time, he essentially had pretty much immediate access to a firearm with an overcapacity magazine, so that hence the 15 rounds as opposed to 10. And that gave him the ability to actually act out and retaliate immediately, just, kind of indiscriminately.
Coming up after the break, when we come back, as the case goes to trial, Kyle Weese maintains he's not the shooter. Welcome back. As the trial for Kyle Weese begins, the Crown faces a couple of big challenges, and the jury makes an unorthodox request. We now return to Catherine McDonald and Shootout at the Duke.
I wanted the jury to understand that this was a very highly charged, shocking crime that happened to regular folks that are just like all of us. Kyle Weese attracted a lot of attention because he had previously been engaged in a shooting for which he'd only been out serving his entire sentence about 3 or 4 months when he shot Bailey. I think the biggest challenge of the case was, there was twofold. One was getting the people comfortable to testify, and the second big piece, of course, was that the gun was later recovered in someone else's possession, which obviously is a challenge because an inference can be drawn. Kyle's not the shooter. The person who they found with the gun is the shooter. There was a witness, John Ty, and he actually picked Kyle Weese out of a photo lineup, but he knew him from the neighborhood. So when he identified him as being in the bar, he had seen him before. There was also circumstantial evidence because Christine, who was Kyle Weese's girlfriend, she also, in a sense, identified Kyle as being involved in a skirmish in the bar, which was kind of over a perceived flirtation with her, although she didn't identify him as a shooter. In fact, she said he was gone by the time of the shooting.
The eyewitnesses were a little suspect. Like, one of the major eyewitnesses initially told the police he didn't know who the shooter was. And then just months later, he changed his mind and said that it was Kyle Weese. There was I think 3 eyewitnesses. A second one picked out Mr. Weese's picture from a photo lineup, but said, this is the picture that looks closest. He didn't say this is the shooter. And the third one maybe was a little more definite, but eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable.
Matthew, what do you have to say? Get out of our face! He's already had his trial by media!
As the jury tried to decipher the truth, things were becoming contentious outside the courtroom.
This way, this way. Excuse me, officer, could you ask these people to leave me alone?
Every day in the courthouse, you didn't know what you were going to expect. There were a lot of tensions in this trial because there was a lot of witness intimidation, a lot of hostility towards one another. Every day there was a different posting on Facebook. People were threatening or making comments about somebody that testified that day, stuff like they shouldn't have, or watch out, that sort of thing. And so it was intimidating people. So we always had to have extra security just to ensure that the courtroom was safe and our witnesses were safe.
Despite the rising temperature, the Crown stood its ground.
We believe that Kyle was very angry. He had a pretty blonde girlfriend who was there in the bar, and Addie Reddick, I believe, was flirting with her and asked her to dance, and Kyle took quite an umbrage with him, started a fight with a group. There were 3 of them, 2 Reddicks and a gentleman called Dwight Marshall. Dwight Marshall and Nathan Reddick were able to pick him out. They had had quite a dialogue with him in the bar. You know, there was this skirmish. So they had quite a bit of an opportunity to observe him and to be able to, you know, identify him at a future point. They also had dealings with him outside because it spilled onto the streets and there was still dialogue. And even when Bailey was shot, I can't remember whether it was Nathan Reddick or Dwight Marshall said, in shock, "You shot a girl." And so they were still observing him, looking at him. And even though it was nighttime, that corner also has lights in the entrance of the bar. There's street lights, there's street cars going by. So it was actually a fairly well-lit area where observations were not difficult to take place.
Then there was the issue of the gun.
We actually brought the young man who had been accused of and convicted of being in possession of that gun. I think he was charged with a robbery and possession of a firearm. I wasn't much interested in his crime. What we were able to show is Kyle Weese was a Caucasian man, you know, about 6 feet tall, slender, teenage who had been found in possession gun was maybe 5'4" Somalian boy. I was also able to ask him directly, and I think his response had, you know, the resonance of truth. Was I asked him if he shot Bailey Zaveda, and he was horrified and shocked. So I think that served the purpose of, you know, kind of eliminating that possibility that Kyle was not the shooter, and in fact there was someone else.
We weren't suggesting that he was the shooter, but we were suggesting that Mr. Weese would not have had access to the gun because it was with this young man and his cohorts at that time.
At some point, Kyle decides it's time to tell his side of things, and he takes the stand.
Kyle testified that one of the Reddicks groped his girlfriend. There was a verbal altercation. As a result of that, the bouncer, Mr. Durrett, escorted Mr. Weese out of the tavern. Mr. Durrett said that 3 or 4 minutes passed, and then there was a series of gunshots outside. Now, Mr. Weese's evidence was by that time he was far down the street and he was going off to sell drugs for a prearranged meeting. He had drugs in his pocket. He didn't want to stick around and have the police find him with drugs. He really didn't know what was going on. It was only later that he found out that anyone had been shot. The girlfriend and the brother were inside the bar initially, but they were standing outside with Bailey and various other people smoking when the shots were fired. So that was a considerable argument for the defense, that if it was Kyle Weese, why would he shoot his own brother for no good reason, and why would he shoot into a group of people that included his own girlfriend.
His testimony clearly left the jury with questions because they made a very rare request to the judge.
The jury passed a note, as they were instructed to do in the event that they wanted to ask the court a question, and the question to the court was that they wanted to attend the crime scene to see it for themselves in person.
I was a Crown for 31 years. That is the only time I have ever been out for a taking of the view. I really think that they wanted to get an idea of the layout of the place and a layout of whether Kyle's story was credible.
Logistic nightmare, because every single jury member would have to be transported to the Duke of York. We would have to provide with a tremendous amount of plainclothes and uniform security. The offender, since it's his process, has to be there. He sat in an unmarked white van to watch the process unfold. So the jury are bused to the scene, and they're allowed to walk around as they did and to examine the bullet strikes and to look at the configuration of the doorway and walk parts of the route. The judge had explained to the jury that they're not allowed to ask any questions because this is not a courtroom. And when your consensus is that you're completed, we're going to return to the courtroom and the trial will continue.
I personally think it helped them to see the distance, why his story wasn't credible. When you actually were there, you saw that distance wasn't more than maybe 10, 12 feet. So ability to observe was actually quite good, as opposed to what you might think was that there might have been confusion or difficulty to, identify who the actual shooter was.
Despite the Crown's confidence that the jury's visit to the Duke would cement their case, the verdict took much longer than anyone expected.
The jury was out for 6 days. At one point, they said they were deadlocked and couldn't reach a verdict.
We were very nervous. There's a lot riding, and he was a very dangerous individual, The stakes are high.
Coming up after the break. When we come back, the jury's verdicts would not come easy. Welcome back. 2 years to the day after Bailey Zavita's murder, the jury reaches a verdict. Here now is Catherine McDonald with the conclusion of Shootout at the Duke.
We had a trial that lasted about 6 weeks. It was a hotly contested trial.
I still remember it was very stressful waiting for the jury, because when you have a charge of the frailties of identification evidence, people take that job very seriously.
After deliberating for 6 days, the jury came back with the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder and on 4 counts of aggravated assault.
It was very electrifying in the courtroom when they came back and they did convict him. It was a huge relief for all of us.
The acquittal for first degree meant that they didn't think the killing was a planned and deliberate one, but it might also have reflected a split in the jury and a compromise, with some of the jurors actually inclined to acquit Mr. Weese.
Now, Mr. Weese got a very stiff sentence for someone convicted of second-degree murder.
Oh yes, he got one of the very stiffest.
Second-degree murder is the highest sentence that I ever received in 22 years of doing murder investigations for second-degree murder convictions. It's as close to first-degree murder as you're ever going to get.
It's the end of a painful chapter for Helen Deere. Today, her daughter's killer, Kyle Weese, was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 22 years.
Today has finally come to an end, and I really hope he never sees the light of day again.
It's one of the toughest sentences ever handed down for second-degree murder in Canadian history.
You don't get many people that are kind of the worst of the worst, but Kyle Weese was the worst of the worst. His history was so pronounced and so categoric by experts, parole officers, probation officers, people that had had contact, plus the victim impact statements, that he was never going to be rehabilitated. So we were very, very happy with the outcome.
Bailey, she died in a terrible, senseless case of gun violence. From your perspective as a Crown, is it getting worse since this case?
It used to be people turned a blind eye because they said, well, it's gangbangers shooting each other. And so people tended not, as long as it wasn't in my backyard. But now you know, the soft targets. It's a playground, it's a park, it's a school now. It's outside the Eaton Center, inside the Eaton Center. So yes, I think the situation's gotten much, much, much worse.
A police officer shot and killed along with a second victim.
Police also responded to an incident just before 3 p.m. this afternoon. 3 individuals were shot.
No guarantees from the Toronto police chief that the recent wave of deadly gun crime in this city can be stopped.
For decades, the Toronto Police Service has been part of a program known as FATE, Firearms Analysis and Tracing Enforcement.
That gives the intelligence of where the gun originated. You follow the gun, whoever hands it went through, and basically where it ends up. That's really the key for us in terms of you want it to be actionable intelligence that can translate into kind of operational, effectiveness.
It used to be that shootings were investigated by the Major Crime Unit of the police division in the area where the crime took place. But in 2019, with shootings on the rise, Toronto Police created the Centralized Shooting Response Team.
What that did was allowed us to basically connect a shooting in 51 to a retaliatory shooting in 23 to a shooting in 42, all in the same night. If I can connect shootings and incidents that are historical based on that firearm being traced to different events, my unit has been very successful in connecting numerous shootings from previous years and taking that offender off the street. If you look at the statistics, it's essentially a 33% reduction.
The police are not the only ones trying to turn things around. For Jessica Farella, Bailey's death turned into a calling of sorts.
At the time, I had just started working with offenders, and I had a desire to go to law school. And after this happened, I decided that I wanted to stay working with offenders because I wanted to be able to impact change, and I wanted to work with them to hopefully be able to prevent someone else from going down the path that this person had gone down, and in turn preventing another family from having to go through what we have been through. And it was literally the deciding factor in what I did with my life.
She remains close with Helen, who carries a piece of her daughter with her at all times.
I had this urn, special ordered and special made, and it has some of her ashes in it. And beside it is her baby ring, which was got in December '85, her being born in June. She couldn't wear it for ages, and then she could wear it, and then she couldn't anymore. So that's what's on the necklace.
We used to joke about being old ladies hanging out together in the retirement home. She's someone who just lived her life without really considering other people's opinions. She was authentically herself, and she was confident and happy all the time. And if you look back at the 23 years, she lived a full life in those 23 years, and she experienced a lot of things, and she never let things that could have potentially hold her back. She just pushed through. That's a big part of who she was. Small town girl, but big city heart.
In 2016, Kyle Weese appealed his conviction, but that appeal was denied. Bailey's family and friends still deeply miss her. Jessica has not been able to delete her phone number, even after all these years, and keeps Bailey's memory alive by celebrating her birthday every year. As for the other victims of the shootout, it's an ongoing struggle to live with the trauma of that night. When we reached out to the woman who discovered she was pregnant, she had this to share. It's been 14 years since that horrific and tragic night that has changed everyone's life forever. It's taken years for the dreams to stop. Hearing the sound of the first shot and looking at Bailey, remembering her green scarf she had on that night. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.